Chapter 8 of David and Yvonne Freeman's book, Essential Linguistics, What You Need to Know to Teach, is titled Implications for Morphology for Teaching, Reading, and Teaching a Second Language. There are many different ways of teaching reading. One way that is discussed in Chapter 8 is called socio-psycholinguistic. Socio-psycholinguistic is teaching a student word meanings by using his or her knowledge of word parts to break these words down. The benefit to having students learn word meanings this way is that they learn many new words. However, there are many difficulties in using knowledge of word parts to recognize words. One difficulty is that first, students need to know how to recognize the word parts. In some cases, it's easy to recognize the word parts, such as in the word transportation. This word has three obvious word parts. The root is port, the prefix is trans, and the suffix is ion. On the other hand, some words have smaller words in them, but they are not actually helpful word parts. For example, in the word mosquito, a student might recognize the smaller word quit, but quit has nothing to do with the meaning of the word mosquito. The second difficulty is, once you have deciphered how to break the word down into its prefix, suffix, and root, you must then figure out the meaning of those smaller words. Some prefixes, suffixes, and roots are easy to decipher, but being that 60% of English words have Latin and Greek roots, most are quite difficult to figure out. The third and final difficulty is the fact that combining prefixes, suffixes, and roots to find the meaning of a word is very hard. Of course, some words are easy to decipher using the knowledge of word parts, such as unrecognizable. Break down the word and you get un, re, cog, eyes, and able, which means not able to make known. However, for a word such as capitation, a knowledge of the word parts of this figure would not help a student learn the meaning of the whole word. Recognizing the parts of a complex word, learning the meanings of word parts, and combining the meanings of these parts to determine the meaning of the whole are all very difficult. As a result, structural analysis has limited value for readers. Linguistic investigations into how words are formed can be interesting and rewarding for students, but attempting to use structural analysis to determine word meanings can be an exercise in frustration. Vocabulary is another way a language is presented to students. As a student, I'm sure you've all had teachers who try to teach through word recognition. This teacher picks out difficult words from a text, and in a pre-teaching drill asks you to look up these words in the dictionary, write down their meaning, and perhaps come up with the definition of your own. Although this seems like a fairly good approach, Freeman and Freeman believe it is problematic and give a few arguments as to why. How do we know which words our students don't know? Teaching vocabulary by the use of a dictionary may not give students the correct meaning as it pertains to the text, and even worse, they may not understand the concepts surrounding the definition. This corresponds with a greater language view of learning as a language rather than acquiring. We should be encouraged as educators to take a view that focuses on acquisition. Acquisition of vocabulary goes along with the socio-psycholinguistic approach, where teachers understand that words represent concepts that are embedded in context and should be taught as such. These teachers seek to increase background knowledge. Front-loading is great to get a reader comfortable with difficult words and concepts they will come across in reading. This can be accomplished in the form of discussion, where experiences are created for the students by using the vocabulary as a guiding point to talk or wander as a group. Charts are particularly helpful for this as well, where students can be guided by word association activities. These help students to build meaning around unfamiliar words by focusing on words and concepts that they are already familiar with. In a quote from the father of critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire, he states, "Reading does not consist merely of decoding the written word or language. Rather, it is preceded by and intertwined with knowledge of the world. Language and reality are dynamically interconnected." Finally, Freeman and Freeman have an interesting argument that gives legitimacy to the socio-psycholinguistic approach. Students acquire more words through reading than they could possibly learn as a result of direct teaching of vocabulary. The vocabulary size study conducted by Steven Pinker found that the average high school graduate knows 60,000 words. Now, if a teacher tries to teach 20 words a week over the course of an entire academic year, their students will have learned 720 words in that year. If this happens from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, the student will know a measly 8,640 words, less than 15% of the average high school graduate's vocabulary. To put this into perspective, another study by Miller and Gilda found that children between 4 and 6 pick up an average of 14 new words a day through oral language and reading, which would mean about 5,000 words per year. This is more closely aligned with Pinker's high school graduate average. There are a few concepts about what it means to know a word that educators should understand before teaching a second language. Phonologically is one way to know a word. Say the word chaos is in a book that a student is reading. They see the word and they know that it means something is in disarray. They can even use it in a paper to describe a situation. However, if this student isn't phonologically familiar with the word, they might pronounce it as cows. Or if they heard it in a sentence, they would not recognize it as the word it is, but rather as a whole other word. Morphological information is the ability to know a word in its simple form, and also when it combines with the inflectional and derivational affixes to produce complex words. For example, knowing an adjective means knowing if it takes the ER in the comparative form. For example, the word big takes the ER. The word difficult does not. Knowing how a word functions in a sentence is a syntactic information. For example, the word bless can be a verb or an adjective. Another example of recognizing syntactic information is knowing whether or not a verb takes an object. The verb go does not take an object, while the word chase does. Semantic knowledge of a word is the ability to define or give a synonym to a word. Also, it is the ability to give extended metaphorical meanings of words, knowing how other words relate to that word, and recognizing the level of generality of different words. For example, cook is a general word, while bake, roast, and broil are specific types of cooking. Understanding the pragmatics of a word means a person knows the real-world use of a word, including the appropriate time and context to use a word. What does all of this have to do with teaching, and specifically with teaching English as a second language? Basically, there are two main implications of morphology on teaching. The first is understanding Krashen's natural order hypothesis. The second is using concepts of morphology in helping students develop academic language. Krashen's natural order hypothesis is based on morpheme studies and states that people acquire components of a second language in a certain order. This order is applied regardless of the first language of the student, as well as whether the student is an adult or a child. The second implication of morphology on the teaching of English as a second language is helping students acquire academic English. Many students who appear to speak and understand English well still struggle in reading academic texts or passing standardized tests. This is because they have acquired conversational English but have not yet acquired academic English. Conversational English is the language of everyday conversation, where language is embedded in a rich context. Often, English learners can draw on background knowledge to help construct meaning. According to Cummins, English learners acquire conversational English in about 2 years. Conversely, academic English can take 5 years to acquire. This is due to the fact that academic language is cognitively more demanding. When English learners are studying an academic subject, they are coping with both new ideas and new vocabulary to express those ideas. There is often less contextual support when learning academic language, as a student may be required to read a textbook with few pictures or listen to a lecture with few visual aids. It is important for teachers to understand the difference between conversational and academic English, as a student who converses easily may still need extra support with learning academic content. Cognate study is one way for teachers to teach both content-specific and general academic vocabulary. Cognates are words that come from the same root. The usefulness of cognate study comes from Cummins' theory of common underlying proficiency, that knowledge acquired in the first language will transfer to the second language. English learners can associate a word that they know in Spanish to the English word. For instance, the Spanish word for history is historia. There are many everyday terms in Spanish that are part of the academic vocabulary in English. However, students often fail to draw on these as they read or interact in the classrooms. Teachers can help students by engaging them in activities that increase their awareness of similar words across languages. For instance, they can work in pairs to identify cognates, or the teacher can create a cognate wall or dictionary with the help of students.